Oh, it really didn't? No, should I?
Welcome to AT&T's teleconference service. Please enter your access code, followed by the pound sign. At the tone, please speak your name.
Idaho State Bar.
There are 1 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press *#.
This one. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take this one. We have pencils there.
Hi there.
Hi,
Are you Julia?
I am. Are you?
Oh, hi. I'm Dylan. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are
My
you?
hands are freezing. It's cold there.
Oh, yeah. It was a little. I didn't have a very long walk, but it felt kind of cool.
Chilly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thanks so much for doing this.
yeah, of course. This is probably the 3rd presentation on the Clean Power Plan I've given since,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
since it came out. So
All
you'd
right.
think I'd have all the tweaks ironed out by now, but no.
Yeah.
And I also made a couple minor changes, so I brought that. I don't know if that's okay because you've got
Yeah.
all that work.
I don't know how to get it. I mean, I don't work here.
How to
get
make it work.
And so I don't know where they. I know the first time they came.
I can
in
probably
here,
do it
something.
without. It's just that last slide was like completely different
Yeah.
this presentation, so.
Well, what we can do when Peter or Preston come in, we can see if they can quickly
Okay.
switch it
If
out.
not, it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Okay. Well, yeah. So the setup is, you know, we've been, that laptop there will webcast. Actually,
Oh, okay.
it's going right now because I was afraid I was going to forget to start it at the beginning of the meeting. So it's actually live now. And then the Polycom is called into the conference call line. And so we'll have a handful of people who are doing one or both of those.
Okay.
And, you know, we typically, you know, spend about the first 15 minutes just doing kind of section business because that gives the speakers time to eat something before they
Right.
have to speak. So,
That's
you know,
helpful.
yeah, we'll spend about 15 minutes.
Well, we need time to get things in our teeth.
Yeah,
so it's very
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so you know, probably
Okay.
15 to 20 minutes of just sort of mundane section business, and then turn it over to you and Ben. Did you and Ben talk about who goes first?
We did. We talked about, because the rule is so complex and it's really hard to talk about any of the fun stuff when it comes to the rule without getting through a big overview of it.
Yeah.
We talked about potentially going back and forth on different sections, but eventually, so he and I met once and we were like, okay, I'll cover this, you cover this, I'll cover this, you cover this. And then afterwards, I tried to do that with people I worked with and they were completely lost.
Yeah.
It was like not enough information, not a good overview.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had some time constraints because I was in Portland the end of last week. So I was like, I'm just going to do an overview of the rule.
Yeah.
And then he said he's going to talk about compliance.
Yeah.
So
That sounds great. I mean, you know, we have a fairly diverse crowd that typically comes to this, and so there'll probably be, you know, maybe a handful of people that know the nuts and bolts of this stuff, but you know, a lot of people that are, you know, new to the bar, new to environmental, they may do more water law than, you know, so yeah, so you know, general is good, especially for something as technical as this. Hey, how you doing?
and there are a couple of slides where it gets into detail, but I did a test run on an attorney who does nothing related to environmental work, and she got it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
hopefully it's not too technical.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again. We really appreciate it.
Glad to do it.
So I mean, probably for the business portion, I'll, you know, sit up here so that I'm on the little webcast thing, and then I'll
Okay.
Turn it over to, you know, you guys, let you guys sit up here.
Okay.
So anyway, it's been a while since we've been here at Gibbons, and this is our first CLE for the season, so see if we can work out the kinks and that sort of thing.
Nice.
Yeah. Hey Peter, how you doing?
Well, you brought your flashlight probably and all set up.
We are. This is Julia. She's one of the
Hi.
speakers.
Julia,
Nice to meet you.
thanks for coming.
So,
Of course. Glad to be here.
so Julia did bring a version with a couple tweaks.
Yeah,
I don't know
maybe
how
a
to
couple
load
pages
that.
to the last
So,
slide.
You should do so. What's this one? Old
This
version?
is
Yeah.
This is the version that went out in.
Okay. And how did this get up here?
Patty came and
Something happened.
got it all set up. Yeah.
Well, I'm surprised she found it. But, all right, that's fine. We can just once you dump that, and we'll come over here.
All right. Man, like I've been using Macs for the past couple of years.
Is it
Now I'm like
Escape?
totally.
Escape.
Did it become like the desktop or something?
Maybe
Oh, that's
that
funny. You're right, like usually you can get out of it.
Oh, and show, but that'll do it. There you go.
So it's
You can just X out of it over there.
Hey.
How are you?
Hello, how's it going? Good.
This is Matthias Fosfet. He's a
Hello.
potential lawsuit perspective.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Dylan wants to be the chair.
Okay. Yeah.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to
Did
meet
make
you. Welcome.
changes to yours? I made a couple more changes.
No, mine's the same, whatever I sent out. Dylan?
Hey, man, I'm Dylan. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for doing this. Yeah,
no problem.
appreciate it. It's like I was telling Juliet, so we have a little webcast thing there. And so for the business portion of the meeting, I'll sit up here and run through that. That'll probably take 15, 20 minutes, give you a chance to eat something. And then I'll get out of the way and let you guys sit up here. So that you're front and center. And we also have the Polycom as a call-in line.
Yeah.
So we'll have probably 4 or 5, one or both remote.
But we also have a
Are you saying you had to get a
yeah, she goes to what's
Officials
called
or-
Boise River Montessori. It's on
Oh, okay.
36th Street. Actually, the Robinson twins are there.
Yeah.
The Fessenmeyer, Robert Fessenmeyer's there. You know Curtis Fessenmeyer.
All right. So, so
And
how old is she now?
she'll be 2 on Christmas Eve.
Okay. Do you feel like the socialization is helping?
It's actually, you know what I do, because we have a great buddy that we've made, that we met like, in the childbirth class, who, their son is 2 weeks younger
So
than
right,
her.
in my sister,
Yeah,
his
that's what I
mouth.
was doing.
And it's a great situation, and to be honest, like, if
Yeah,
I had
Yeah.
my druthers, I would love to be with her, you know, more, but,
That's easier because.
like now, as they play together, she just started going, she's 18 months old.
And if something was weird, of
And
course,
it
you always.
is pretty amazing like, to see, like,
Oh, there
she
you go.
doesn't like to share necessarily, but like, she gets like, pretty
So
well.
Dylan was saying that we can
And
sit here.
Just the
Yeah, that
kinds
probably
of
makes
things
sense.
that
Yeah.
she
Two of
do,
you right there, and then
like sorting things, and I don't know, she's just doing things that I'm like,
Yeah,
well, maybe
after
she
he's
can.
done with his.
Do you think-
intro.
I mean,
And we have another.
We're on the PBS.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, sure. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
but really
you know,
building
Kathy and I are
for
going to,
yeah, once or twice.
Yeah. Parents. Meetings in here. There's a lady across the
Old,
street who takes.
Oh, really? So
she's
back in the
in charge of
30s,
Okay. Super nice.
You
know, at some point-
you guys should sign in.
Oh, yeah.
Teacher credit.
He's actually now like.
Okay.
That was a story.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, thanks so much for all the, just the work and ordering and all that. Put it out. Yeah.
Everything working?
And I see Peter's here. Yeah. Yeah, it seems, yeah.
All right.
It's
But,
good. Got the-
But I
So, yeah,
it seems to me.
Just still some software dialed in on the console.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're definitely.
Yeah.
It's like,
Why do I
we're
like,
cool.
I just feel
Impressed.
trapped.
Yeah, so I minute I know. But it's like, yeah.
Well, you know,
Oh, yeah.
he's still doing
Yeah.
it, he was
Okay.
Hi.
She's from-
Natalie, nice to meet you.
She's over.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. What's
We
going
started.
on?
Trying to think of the-
Well,
See, David
yeah,
Stamps.
that's, you know,
Yeah.
There, right?
It was awesome.
I don't know.
And she was like,
Oh,
"Yeah, they're not
Is there a mic?
5 kids with like 12 years. It's a short amount of time.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, so she's got a little bit of project.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's just fun, and then they just know all the
Something.
There's part of
What do you want?
Like young
Right,
Yeah. Which we're super sorry. Like, couldn't be more. But,
That's awesome. And you're talking I'm all over the Verba is such a huge part of our house.
Yeah, the one like basically we're shaped.
Well, it sounds like this.
It's not actually.
You know?
It's a cool place, got to.
All over the geography lines.
That does work.
always thought that looked like a
Hey,
pretty
Kale,
good.
this is cemetery.
Yeah.
And, Kale's over all, he's also
And
over
that
at
can be a lot.
ISB. Matthias is a teacher.
It's good to
Yeah.
Are you from?
Yeah.
I was gonna say you look pretty fit.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone actually look around?
No, that's
I know, why isn't there a good?
So St. Louis, that's in Southwestern. So we're gonna, for spring break. Sort of.
Yeah, design support.
Yeah. So I got to take a couple classes outside the law school.
Yeah, that's awfully nice.
I'm literally stepping outside for classes. I'm in like able to.
Yeah. Yeah, we did mow out.
Who would say to me, like, when we do these projects, they were like, what do you mean?
Southwest. You know, actually, we're not big on tractors. We did take a bias. But we have the locations too, so even if we were picking up. Yeah. So it was a lot of hiking, scenic driving.
Yeah.
Actually, canyon might be a way. Here's so much about arches, but canyon life is just, to me, the scenery of that just maybe a half notch away from some of the right over.
You're posting how you did.
We have some desert scenery now. Some Boise. Something like
Somebody now. Yeah, she was at
Yeah, I still distinctly remember when I first.
That's good.
We got our first split. Very strong. Yeah.
So what you were
Cool, yeah, that's fantastic.
What you working on?
Yeah.
Why don't you grab it?
One of you the grower, one of you the.
He's the grower on the fire.
Are you gonna get to eat?
This is
food
yours.
or
Yeah, he's trying some exams.
let the speaker?
Very
be
esteemed.
finished?
Exactly.
It's okay.
I've been involved with it.
Have you been to one of these before? Okay, I wasn't here last time. What do you do?
Anything fun for the summer?
Nice.
We got the little youngins.
I am a school practitioner.
We've all been taking them all over the
All right,
national
that's
parks.
nice.
And,
Oh, that's you.
Grand Teton, Glacier, Banff, Jasper, Kootenai.
It's going good.
Was that local?
Yeah, we drove all over the place.
Yeah. You know, they use that.
What's that? There's a silent show over there too. Oh my God, Dan who's close.
We could go check that the other day. I sold my parking spot every day for the next year.
I've never seen it. I mean, just, they have parking lots a mile away, it's auxiliary parking lots for like 2 weeks. Every roadside pull off.
Yeah, it's usually like those airport people movers, like you get part of the extra parking, like 10 miles in.
Yeah. But then it's really just Banff, and then you have other national parks right next to there, it's just beautiful, and no one's there.
The whole thing where you used to be like by yourself, nowhere.
if you hike, we didn't typically hike. You know, we had a Bodie on my backpack. You ditch a lot of people as soon as you're a mile away from the road. Right.
No, I didn't.
And these roads, access roads, they're all true.
When you just kind of sort of walk out.
There's a way to make money like that. If we're halfway down that US road, open the line, drive across the shop, I can just. You have a really big boat, a really big boat. So that go next.
I think if you're a local and just went there early and parked your beater car, or, you know, went around and reserved spots and sold them, you could probably.
How's it going, Marie?
I'm well, how are you?
All right. So you're at.
Nice, you walk.
It was so funny, like a couple months ago, she went up
Oh, right, yeah.
and then I realized that like, all the social and everything else is but I saw the end
And so,
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it was the first section that was so long, it's like literally just,
In Yellowstone, I went up there and
6 people one day at every meeting to go fishing. I don't remember how many campgrounds were, but, you know,
really popular ones.
yeah,
We'd be there at 4 in the morning.
This sort of
And ask
all.
the camp host, who's leaving today?
Yeah.
And then she's like, well, I haven't heard from spot 17, 19, 21, so if you want to just like hover outside the tent. And then they get out to like brush their teeth and you're like, are you leaving today? You're like, no, you gotta run to the next one. Yeah. I mean, same thing whenever I finally do the spot. And the next day, it's like, yeah, it's okay.
Sure, like, hey, you know, it's like, I'll be up here and then we have 2 speakers here.
Like, where they are, like, hey, maybe we should charge more and have more campsites.
Wouldn't it be like some of the things, customers like, I have regular, yeah, I'm okay. Which one do you want? And they're like, you go in, you got shit.
All right, folks, why don't we get started? I know we still have a few people getting food, but we do have a fair amount to cover, and we want to get to our speakers for sure. So first of all, do I have anybody on the phone?
Life changes.
Yeah, are you getting more sleep or in the spring?
Okay, we'll do some introductions here in a sec, and then I'll get to whoever's on the phone. Tyson, are you on there?
Yes, I'm on here.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, well, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is a great turnout for sure. And I also want to thank, Gibbons Pursley and Peter and Preston for setting this up. These are, great facilities and, just a good place to do this. And it saves the section some money to not have to pay the bar for all the, use of their stuff. So thanks for doing that, guys. Really appreciate it. We do have a lot of people here, but we're still, I think, small enough to do some quick, just around the table introduction. So again, my name is Dylan Lawrence. I'm with Varon Wardwell here in Boise. I'm the chairperson of the section. And then why don't we start with the speakers and go around real quick.
All right, I'm Julia Hilton with Idaho Power Company. I do work and environmental work for Idaho Power.
I'm Ben Otto, with the Idaho Conservation League, and I do, I'm the energy program.
I'm JD Sater. I work for Justice Seismic as a law clerk.
I'm Emmy Blades, work for the AG's office for the Department of Water Resources.
I'm Peter Barton. I'm a partner here at Gibbons Pursley.
Stephanie Reginald, an associate over at Gibbons Code.
Pete?
I'm Peter Richardson with the Richardson Adams. Sorry.
I'm Greg Adams, also with Richardson Adams.
I'm Kelsey Nunez, I have my own firm.
David Spanish with Idaho Power.
Andrea Courtney, the Attorney General's office for DEQ.
Preston Carter, I'm here at Gibbons Pursley.
Natalie Catalina, I also have my own practice.
Gail Becker, I also have my own practice and board member for Idaho Conservation League.
And I'm Marie Kellner, and I'm the water associate at Idaho Conservation League.
My name is Matthias Fosfett, and I am a prospective JD student.
Candace McHugh, partner at McHugh Bromley.
All right. Oh, yeah. Go ahead,
I'm
Mark.
Mark Keen Beaver, the Office of the Attorney General.
Wow, look at that. So we're even into the bleacher seats. We've got so many people here. And for those on the phone, I apologize if when we get to people who are far from the Polycom, if they fade out. We have a Polycom, but it doesn't have those tentacles that you sometimes see. So, but we'll have all the speakers come up right up here, so that it should come through loud and clear. So who do we have on the phone?
This is Peggy Henry, Department of Energy in Idaho Falls.
Okay, thanks, Peggy.
And this is Tyson Nelson.
All right, I think we had a
Jeremy Clark.
Okay, great. Anybody else on the phone? No? Okay. All right, we'll do about, probably 15 minutes or so of section business, give the speakers a chance to eat, and then we'll turn to the CLE. And just as an initial matter, I know it's a little confusing when Dana sends those emails right before the section meeting. So typically she sends one a week before, and that's the one you need to RSVP to. And then I had her distribute some written materials, and rather than just send those, she also sends out like a new meeting announcement. So if that happens again, you don't have to RSVP to the second one. I'll get you the first time, but I know that I remember getting those in the past, and then I'd have to go to my sent folder. Did I RSVP or not? So I apologize if that was a little confusing. One of the things that we did circulate were the minutes to the previous meeting in September. And I did confirm with Mahmood that they do like to have us, formally kind of approve the minutes. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move we approve the minutes.
Okay, Tyson, that was a motion by Peter Barton. Do I have any second?
Second.
Okay, JD Sater with the second, and maybe Kale with the third. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, passes unanimously, Tyson. First hurdle has been overcome. So one thing, we talked about the advocate last time, and it doesn't look like Nick Warden is here. He did submit the request to Dan Black to get us in an issue of the advocate. And so just the other day, Dan circulated the schedule, and we're currently assigned the June-July 2016 issue. That would mean that articles would be due April 13th, 2016. And when I got that, I was like, golly, it feels like we just did an issue. And so the one that we did was in May of 2015. And so one thing I wanted to bounce off the group as to whether, he did say that we can try to request a trade if we want to and get a little bit later. Because it seems like they're spaced awfully close together. So I'll just put that out there for you guys. I mean, if we have enough people that say, yeah, no problem, I'll do an article, then we'll just leave it status quo. But if we want to try and get a later issue, we can ask. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Could you repeat the dates and how they're close together?
Yeah, so it will be the June-July 2016 issue. The articles would be due April 13th, 2016. The last issue we sponsored was May 2015. So a little, basically,
14 months.
13, 14 month gap. So
that doesn't bother me much, I guess, but the April timeline, that's the problem people signed out, which is a whole 6 months away. So I guess that'd be the testing point. You think they could have articles 6 months?
Yeah.
In the past, we've had very strong submissions. We've not had a problem filling our quota.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
that
Last
would be the
issue.
default to go as is, but if people think that 6 months is not enough time, they want to take time, I'll do that I would like.
Yeah. I mean, do we have just sort of an unofficial show of hands of people that might be willing and able to do articles in the roughly 6 month time frame? Peter, Kelsey, Andrea, sort of, kind of. Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any strong opinions the other way in terms of let's push it out? I want to do an article, but I just can't do it on that time frame. Emmy? Okay.
She's got a CLE plan, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, that's for sure. All right. Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't seem like there's a lot of overwhelming support for going against it. So unless it's not we have to decide it right here and now anyway. But I guess I'm inclined to just leave the status quo unless I hear a lot of people saying we should try and move it.
It might be helpful to send out or have roundtable topics.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I wouldn't know necessarily what is coming up between now and April. I imagine there's pending court cases that have some potential decisions that are going to be expected between now and then, or so that might be helpful to spark ideas, or for you to be able to reach out, or us to reach out to people that would know.
Yeah.
And so have a better feel if you could fill that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can do that. Maybe a homework assignment for us all is to start brainstorming on some topics, and maybe we can spend a few minutes at the next meeting discussing. I mean, it seems like within this area, I mean, even though we're a relatively small section compared to others, I still think that there are so many different aspects to environmental and natural resources that there will be a shortage of topics for sure. I'm just more concerned about, it's a fair amount of time to do these articles, and if I feel like we just did one, then kind of like, oh gosh, another one already. So, but yeah, why don't we all think about some topics, maybe bring a couple each, and we could spend a few minutes in the next meeting throwing some stuff out there. But like I said, at this point, unless I hear otherwise strongly, we'll just leave it as is for now. So that's the advocate. We do have 5 new section members, and is anybody here today that's a new member? Like totally newly passed the bar and all that? No? Okay. Well, I was going to be happy to report that, as we all know, a few years ago, we all phased out all of the section hazing. Which, I don't know about you guys, but I had to memorize the whole 40 CFR and recite it back under extreme duress. So that's been phased out. November meeting, as we discussed before, we are moving that to November 18th because, with our regular schedule will be the day before Thanksgiving, which probably isn't going to be great for attendance. And I don't think we have any huge conflicts with other sections or anything like that on November 18th. We do have, in terms of topic and speakers, we do have somebody who has said they're available to talk about the DEQ's fish consumption and kind of water quality standards rulemaking. That person would be, going at it from the industry side. And so if there's anybody in the audience that wants to suggest somebody from, DEQ or from the conservation community, you might also like to, I see Andrea raising her hand, speak on the same topic. But and Andrea can probably talk about the background of it a little bit more, but it's a rulemaking that has been going on. I think public comment period ends early November, so the timing is good. And it relates to, I guess, what EPA's disapproval of some DEQ water quality standards based upon assumptions about how much fish Idahoans consume. Andrea, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, Doug Condy in our office is the one who's been doing most of the work on that. So I asked him who he thought from DEQ would be a good speaker, and he gave me a name like 10 minutes ago. So
okay.
I will check his schedule and see if he could be here on the 18th. But Don Essig is like mad genius when it comes to a lot of things, and he's really good at presenting complex information in a way that we can understand. So I'll see if he can be here. He's been doing most of the calculations and everything, because they look at risk factors, they look at subpopulations, they look at everything, and they crunch numbers like crazy. So he'd be the perfect one that could talk about a little bit about the history, how we got to this point, what EPA has asked of DEQ, what some of the comments have been, what we anticipate the issues will be, and then what DEQ is in the works of putting together.
Okay, great.
So hopefully Don can do it.
Yeah. And I was going to say ICL has engaged on that issue pretty strongly.
Right.
So I'm not the person to talk, but I can go back and see if we can provide somebody to speak.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, we can do a lot of that networking and planning offline. So thank you for those suggestions. And Tyson, that was Andrea Courtney and Marie Kellner that were talking about trying to line up speakers on that topic. And just more generally in terms of monthly CLEs, thanks. A lot of you guys have provided suggestions, helped us reach out to particular speakers. So thanks for doing that. Peter has done a lot of it. Andrea, obviously. Greg Adams has been helpful, and if I'm leaving anybody out, I apologize. So, I think we should have some good CLEs coming up. I think the rest of at least this term is shaping up pretty well in terms of CLEs. In terms of the half-day CLE, Emmy has been working on that. You want to provide us with a quick update?
Sure. Set a date for January 8th. And location, Idaho Law and Justice Learning Center, so that's where the law school's at now, across from the Supreme Court building. Went on a tour there of that. We're gonna use one of their big classrooms, which should be pretty awesome. They've got good technology in there. It'll be free, which is great. Free facility, so that's nice. Lined up a bunch of speakers. I think it's going to be like a 4-hour-long CLE. So the first panel will probably be on like the idea of, so the title will be Collaboration and Litigation with Government. That's what I'm thinking. The first hour would be on the collaboration with government idea. I've got Rick Johnson lined up from ICL to talk about hopefully the recent Boulder White Clouds and his experiences there. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm hoping, so it's not just a touchy-feely, feel-good thing. It'll be some good practical tips for people on that. And then the remaining 3 hours will be more about the litigation with government idea. So Tom Perry and Murray Feldman are going to do a panel, and Deb Ferguson and Laird Lucas will do a panel, and kind of leaving the specifics of the discussion up to them at this point. And then Brian Hurlbut came up with a good topic of sort of the idea of ethics in litigating with government. So I think he's going to do a panel on that. I'm poking Chris Meyer to be on that panel with him. So that's sort of how things are shaping up at the moment.
Great. Now, having some ethics credit will probably increase the attendance like by 20% or something like that. And just to clarify, like I have done like absolutely nothing on this. So Emmy sent me an email saying, here's my thoughts, and then it was like 5 pages of topics and speakers and all that. So we shouldn't be surprised, because last year it was one of the best half day or all day CLEs I've been to in years. So let us know if you need any help. Otherwise,
thanks. And I've been reaching out to people, so this certainly isn't just a solo effort.
Yeah.
I wrote Peter into doing an introduction too. So
thank you, Peter.
Very helpful.
All right. Well, that's great. So something else that was circulated with the materials yesterday was the last set of financial statements from the bar. Tyson, do you have anything to add about the finances of our esteemed section?
It looks like we're still in good shape.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Okay, does anybody have anything else in terms of section business before we get on to the CLEs? Okay, all right, well, let's get to it then. I'll do some quick introductions and then have them come up here and take my place. So I think the first speaker will be Julia Hilton. Julia is corporate counsel at Idaho Power, where her current practice focuses on federal and state regulatory matters. Prior to joining Idaho Power in 2012, she was the Associate General Counsel at the American Samoa Power Authority for 4 years. Julia clerked for the Idaho Supreme Court and the High Court of American Samoa after graduating magna cum laude from Gonzaga University School of Law. Julia is Idaho Power's lead counsel on an internal team working on the Clean Power Plan. Just out of curiosity, who did you clerk for on the Idaho Supreme Court?
Schroeder.
Okay. He has some experience with water and natural resources stuff. And then we also have Ben Otto. Ben is the Energy Associate for the Idaho Conservation League. He holds a Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School and a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School. ICL's energy program focuses on creating strong standards and incentives for energy efficiency, distributed power, and clean energy resources, while protecting the landscapes and wildlife Idahoans cherish. All right, so I will turn it over to Julia and Ben, and you guys can come up here so that you can be on computer box.
All right. So I am going to talk about the Clean Power Plan, which regulates CO2 emissions from existing power generation sources. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here, the reasons for the plan, give you an overview of the plan, talk about how that impacts Idaho, and then some of the litigation going on about the plan right now. Because the plan requires state-specific standards throughout most of this, when I say we, I mean Idaho as a state has to meet certain goals. So
I think you could just, yeah.
Okay. So how we got here. This chart shows global CO2 trends starting in 1990 and going through 2012. The blue line down here, sorry, I'm going to stand up so I can point. This blue line is the US, and it's remained relatively constant over that period of time. But you can see that both China and India have some really significant increases in CO2 output beginning in the early 2000s. So due to this increase, Obama met with the president of China and agreed to reduce CO2 output. Both presidents agreed to reduce CO2 output in their countries. So in the US, the CO2 output for the same period of time, this shows output by sector. The energy generation sector is responsible for about 1/3 of the CO2 output across the country. So in order to meet the goal, Obama has a 30% goal, a reduction of 30% of carbon output by 2030. In order to meet that goal, the EPA is regulating existing generation sources. So the timeline is really here to show you the difference between the base level and the baseline year. The base level year is the year that they use when they're talking about that 30% reduction. They're talking about a reduction from 2005 levels. But 2012 is the baseline year that they use to make the calculations from. The 2005 data is a little stale. It'd be difficult to make changes from that level. So while I have a timeline up here, the final rule came out about 2 months ago, and along with the final rule was a proposed federal implementation plan. And then states have 3 years to submit their final state plans. It sounds like a generous timeline, but states have to submit their initial state plan in 1 year. And then compliance kicks off in 2022 with some interim goals until you reach the final goal in 2030. So there are some final and proposed portions of the rule, and I'm talking about all of them as if they're all in effect, but I wanted to point out what's final and what isn't. So the compliance goals are final, the timelines are final. What is not final is the Clean Energy Incentive Program, the federal implementation plan, the model trading rules. If changes to those portions are as significant as we saw with the proposed rule to the final rule, it may be very different by the time we receive that final rule. So we have states and other entities have 90 days from last Friday to submit comments on that proposed portion, and then we'll get a final version of that in the next year or so. Okay. So all of that was background. Now we can start talking about the rule. Well, almost start talking about the rule. So Section 112, when the EPA regulates generation sources, there are a couple areas under the Clean Air Act that they can regulate. Section 112 allows them to regulate certain specific pollutants, but they have to be on a list within a section. CO2 is not on the list. So we are not under Section 112. Section 111D regulates new sources. It's a national standard that's applied to all new sources of generation. And the Clean Power Plan is not regulating new sources. It is regulating existing stationary sources. This is interesting because under Section 111D, the EPA is required to implement a state-by-state performance standard rather than a national standard. So the goals for each state are different. And these are state goals, like I mentioned earlier, not utility goals. The state has to submit an implementation plan, and then the utilities will work with them to meet that. It's interesting because it also draws lines around each state for both goal setting and compliance purposes, which is not how the energy generation and transmission system works. which is part of what complicates things. So the performance standard in the Clean Power Plan is the degree of emissions limitation that's achievable through the best system of emissions reduction. So the BSER is an acronym that you'll see anytime you read about the Clean Power Plan. The interesting thing about the BSER in the Clean Power Plan is that historically the term system has been processes and procedures that take place at the generation source itself. So you've got the entire generation system, generation transmission, all the way until it reaches the end user. Historically, system has meant things that occur within the fence line of a generation source. The EPA has defined system now under the Clean Power Plan to include anything that occurs within the entire energy system. So they're talking about changes to transmission, distribution, and even things that occur when it reaches the consumer.
Okay, follow one step further. Inside the house, efficiency of the refrigerator.
Yes, energy efficiency programs within your home.
And to follow that step further, state of Idaho could pass regs saying, and all inefficient refrigerators could be one way places goes, because they can regulate the system.
Potentially. So this new definition of the term system is a huge reason why the rule has been so controversial, because it expands the scope of EPA's regulation of the system. So the performance standard calculations are relatively complex, and I'm going to try to talk about this without doing any math. There are numbers in here, but don't be afraid. I won't really talk about them. So the EPA uses 3 building blocks to reach a performance standard. The first is heat rate improvements at coal plants. This allows the coal plant to burn more efficiently, so it increases the energy generation and reduces CO2 output. The second building block is a redispatch from coal to natural gas. So within a state, you reduce your coal generation until you hit 0, increase natural gas generation until you hit 70%. Whichever number you hit first is where you stop. And then the third building block is incremental renewable generation, and this is only post-2013 renewable generation. So the EPA has taken these 3 building blocks and come up with subcategory standards for both coal and natural gas plants. The numbers themselves are not really important, but what's important to note is that you can't meet these goals at the unit level. You have to use those second and third building blocks that occur outside of the fence line of a generation source in order to reach those goals. And these are more stringent than the standards for new sources of generation. So the EPA has unintentionally created a system that incentivizes people to build new thermal generation rather than use the existing generation. In order to prevent that, there's a whole section called leakage within the rule where they've intended to create rules that minimize that effect, but it's still one of the big criticisms of the rule. So these performance standards are then applied to an adjusted baseline for each state. The adjustments are different depending on the makeup of the state. In Idaho, we have 2 adjustments because if you'll remember, we had a 2012 baseline. In Idaho, we had a brand new natural gas plant built in 2012. It was only online for a portion of the year. So they made an adjustment to reflect what that would, excuse me, I have a cold. So they made an adjustment to reflect what that would look like under a normal use year, but it was only online for half of the year. And then the other adjustment that they made is for hydro variability. So states like Idaho, who rely a lot on hydro, when you have a good hydro year, you use your thermal generation a lot less. When you have a bad hydro year, you use your thermal generation a lot more. So they used an average of years to kind of smooth that out. And then they came up with a rate and a mass-based goal for each state. Okay, so under a rate-based goal, it ties CO2 output to generation. So you have a certain number of pounds of CO2 that you're allowed to emit per megawatts of generation. In a mass-based state, and Idaho hasn't decided which route it's going to take. So in a mass-based state, you have essentially a bucket of allowances or tons of CO2 that you have to stay under. It's a flat cap within a state. It's not tied to generation. So states can simply generate less and meet a mass-based goal. That certainly would lead to other problems with having enough power, but it is one way to meet the goal. In a rate-based state, there are emissions rate credits that can be traded or used or generated. You generate one emissions rate credit, which has been called an ERC. So you generate an ERC by any post-2013 zero carbon generation. In the proposed rule, you could generate an ERC through energy efficiency, and the final rule is only through post-2013 renewables. And then in a mass-based system, you have this bucket of allowances that can be traded. You can't trade between the two systems. So you can't trade an ERC for an allowance. An allowance is 1 ton of CO2, so they aren't equivalent, and EPA hasn't done the calculation to allow trading. Because the states decide which path they're going to take, it's important to find out what your neighbors are doing, particularly neighboring states that you import or export generation to. So how does this impact Idaho? Well, we already know Idaho's pretty awesome. So there's really a unique combination of natural resources and state policies within the state of Idaho that have led us to have the second lowest CO2 output within the country. We're second only to Vermont that doesn't have any natural gas plants.
And you said CO2 emissions, not methane, for instance.
Yeah, just CO2.
Do we know actually how we add all greenhouse gases, how we
I don't know.
Because the agriculture is the big swing on that.
Right.
Well, is this per generation or just per all sources, for electrical generation or all?
According to, so I pulled this off of the EPA's website and I don't remember.
This only deals
It
with
was all
generation located within the state of Idaho. It's not about consumption, it's generation.
Yeah.
Not also transportation and other sources of CO2.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's
I think that
electric
this is
sector
just electric sector CO2.
in-state generation.
Yeah. We don't have any in-state coal generation. We have 2 natural gas units within the state that fall under the rule. We have a huge amount of zero carbon generation within the state, and that's continuing to grow. We also have robust energy efficiency programs. The PUC mandates utilities to seek all cost-effective energy efficiency. So I know at Idaho Power, we have a huge department that's dedicated to that. And so it looks like when you're looking at what happens within the state of Idaho, Idaho won't have problems complying. The problem then is that Idaho does not generate all the energy that it consumes. We're a net importer, so we import a significant amount of energy from other states. So up till now, I've talked a lot about what's happening in Idaho. The next slide, I'm going to talk about where Idaho Power imports generation from, simply because that's the information that I have. So Idaho Power is a part owner in 3 coal generation stations that are out of state. We have an ownership interest in Boardman in Oregon, which is scheduled to cease coal-fired operations in 2020. So the implementation period in the rule does not begin until 2022. So there won't be any problem under the rule in Oregon. We also have an ownership interest in Valmy in Nevada. We don't have a scheduled retirement date for Valmy yet. We've been working with our partners to come up with one. We modeled 2025 in the IRP, and if that is the date that everyone agrees to, then we don't anticipate that there'll be problems in Nevada. But we're really concerned about what's happening in Wyoming and how the rule will impact them. Idaho Power has a 3rd ownership interest in Bridger. The goal for Wyoming is significantly lower than its 2012 baseline. So this is the rate that I put up here is just to show you how difficult it will be for Wyoming to comply. So in 2012, this state emitted about 2,300 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. The final goal that they have to meet is around 1,300. So that is a huge reduction. Idaho, and not just Idaho Power, but Idaho as a state receives quite a bit of generation from Wyoming. Within the state, the energy consumed within Idaho is 25% of that comes from Wyoming. So it's hugely important to the state of Idaho that we work with Wyoming to see what can be done about cooperation to help them comply. So what do states like Wyoming do? Well, they sue. So the final rule was published in the Federal Register on Friday, and that kicks off the period when litigation can begin. So as of today, 25 states and 17 entities are involved in litigation against the EPA over what's happening within the rule. So I tried to chunk it up to just high-level issues of what's happening in the litigation. There's a lot more out there, but this was intended to summarize it. So there are states' rights issues. There's a big dispute over who gets to regulate state energy policy, because this really drives a lot of changes to the energy industry instead of simply regulating environmental impacts. Historically, the state regulators have been allowed to regulate energy policy. FERC regulates energy policy when it crosses state lines, but there are allegations that this is overreaching by the EPA. There are also allegations that this is essentially mandating changes, not providing options for changes. If you're in a state like Wyoming, where any way you look at the rule, you can't figure out how to comply, all of the things that the EPA has laid out as potential options start looking like mandates and requirements from the feds. So a lot of states don't take too kindly to being told what to do. Then we also have due process concerns. There's a lot of allegations that limitation of use of an asset is a regulatory taking. Also allegations, and these are new based on the final rule that came out, that the EPA violated the Administrative Procedures Act because there are portions in the final rule that were not included in the proposed rule that states and other stakeholders didn't have the ability to comment on. And then the final thing is sort of the legislation.
Due process is not brought by the states, or they're brought by, presumably by generators that bring the due process challenge?
Both.
The states bring in due process challenge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they didn't have the ability to weigh in either.
That would be EPA.
Yeah, under the EPA. No, that's generators, the first one, generators. So then the other argument that has been talked about a lot is referred to as the legislative glitch. If you look at the language of the Clean Air Act, it looks to me like you can't regulate under both sections 112 and sections 111 of the Clean Air Act. That the plain language says that you can't regulate a source category, so a generation source, under both places. The EPA is looking back at some amendments that were made in 1990. Conforming changes were made in the one version that was published in the statutes at large that were not made in another version that was published in the US Code. So there are minor differences between the two official versions of the law, and the EPA is saying that this creates ambiguity and allows them to regulate under both sections. So I don't know how either one of these or any of these arguments are going to play out, and it will likely be years before we know. So this is all I have prepared. I've included at the end a chart, because those of us who've been working on this for a long time look at everything from a what did we have in the proposed rule and what do we have in the final rule kind of standpoint. So the chart's just there for reference. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So last I heard, Idaho as a state is not planning on litigating.
That's my understanding.
Is that still
the
case? Is Idaho just assuming that the money spent on litigating would be better spent on figuring out what to do? Do you have insights on why they're not saying? It seems like Idaho sues the federal government for laws all the time. So why something this huge wouldn't be cause for litigation?
I don't know. I think that you would have to talk to state folks on that. we, the 111D team at Idaho Power has been working with the Office of Energy Resources, the PUC, and the DEQ to find out what their thoughts are. And all we've heard is that they don't plan to litigate because they don't think it's a good use of time. But I mean, there may be a lot more behind it.
What was the rate structure if the hydropower becomes much more desirable to people to have in their portfolios? So hydropower prices increase potentially as a source, and therefore we see our net prices increase here in Idaho because of other states trying to use that power?
Not really, because under the final version of the rule, renewable generation doesn't really count as renewable unless it's post 2013. So one of the big criticisms of the rule is that folks like Idaho that are early adopters are not getting credit for that sort of, huge base of zero carbon generation that we have.
Overall hydro in neighboring states. I guess it's the same principle.
Same thing. So it doesn't help. You can't trade it.
Yeah. A lot of the hydro generation is kind of already allocated to people. Like we're already using what we have on Idaho Power System. There's some in the wholesale market that's run by the Bonneville Power Administration, but we're using what we have already. And so then there would be, we're building new big sources of hydro. There's just not a lot of places left to build new big hydro in the West.
Well, and it would be a hard sell.
I wasn't looking to hydro.
So Julie, when you say post 2013 has to be, it's constructed, the facility, generation facility had to be constructed in 2013 or afterwards?
Yes.
In order to qualify as an ERC?
Yes.
How much of that does Idaho Power have?
I don't remember. I had the number in an earlier version of the presentation, but I don't remember.
But a fair amount, right?
Yeah. Those ERCs are allocated just under the model trading rules, so this is all still up in the air.
And those can be traded separately from the RECs, right?
Yes, they are separate and distinct from the RECs. They can be allocated by the state, however the state wants to allocate them. So the state gets the ERCs and decides how to dole them out.
And I'll have a little bit more on that in my presentation.
Yeah.
But is that only if the state adopts that model?
Only if it adopts a rate-based model. If you adopt a mass-based, then you go with tons of allowances that you trade.
So did Wyoming already decide to go with the rate model?
We are still talking to them. I think everybody's trying to figure out what Wyoming does because they export to a lot of states. So there are a lot of states that are really concerned about what Wyoming's doing. And so far, no real indication. There is a group of Western utilities, and Ben's been involved in this as well. The Center for the New Energy Economy has been putting together workshops and meetings with, I think it's like 11 Western states. So utilities, state regulators, and other stakeholders get together and try to figure out what the best method of complying with the rule would be for neighboring states and states that have generation that overlap state lines. So they're working on a modeling project right now that would allow anyone really to use the model to run generation scenarios and see whether a rate-based or a mass-based system would be better.
So I'm going to talk more about kind of compliance options, and maybe that will help answer some of these questions, and then we can go back to questions in a little bit that work for folks. I hit the wrong button.
Here.
If you hit it here,
Skin slide and show at the bottom.
And show.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, the wrong one. There we go.
And if you go to,
all right. So this is just a reminder of the compliance the timing, what we're looking at. So what I'm really going to do is talk about where we are now and going forward. So we have the 2016, September is the key month. So September 2016, states have to kind of give their first filing to EPA, and either they could have a whole plan and ready to go, let's go bananas. I heard Pennsylvania wants to do that. That seems pretty ambitious, but go for it, Pennsylvania. You can also, states can ask for an extension. EPA has signaled that it's going to be pretty easy to get an extension and basically saying, yes, we plan to come up with a plan. Here's our basic process. We'll get back to you in September of 2017. That's when a little more formal progress report will have to go to EPA. States will have to pick their basic compliance pathway, either the mass path or the rate path. And also have there's some pretty substantive requirements about public outreach. The kind of public participation that's going to happen as states develop their plan. There's a big focus on making sure that what the EPA calls vulnerable communities, which is actually kind of loosely defined. It's hard to get a clear answer what that means. But there's some kind of substantive requirements to include public outreach in the state plan process. And then by September of 2018, states will have to actually have their full plan to EPA for approval. You can see actual compliance starts in 2022. There's this interim thing, and EPA is trying to create some incentives for states to take some early action. This Clean Energy Incentive Program is a way to, a state plan could try to get energy efficiency measures installed in low-income communities, and you can get double carbon reduction credits, 2-for-1 credits. Or there's certain types of renewables where you can earn kind of bonus credits in that early period. And it's tried to incent this early action so states start moving early towards compliance. Then the compliance period is a series of steps. There's some recommended steps. It's really just to try to set a glide path on the carbon reductions. And then by 2030, states have to hit those final targets, and those would be maintained going forward. I don't think there's an end date on there, kind of in perpetuity. So that's where we're at. I think that as long as people keep working at this, this is plenty of time. There's years here to come up with a plan, and then there's years to kind of make sure that plan makes sense, and then there's years to practice compliance, and then we get to final compliance. So it depends on where you stand on that. Scroll. Let's scroll. We're working on this. How about this?
Scroll is the only thing I got to work.
Yeah, we'll try some buttons over here. Oh, I hit the wrong one. So we're at the Conservation League. We're good at protecting the environment. We're figuring out technology. Okay, so lots of options. This is a slide from the EPA, and it lists a lot of states and utilities, and everybody was asking for a huge amount of compliance flexibility. A lot of options to how to come up with the carbon reductions that are mandated. This is a list of them. Heat rates improvements, I call burn coal better. It's basically making your fossil plants much more efficient, so you get much more energy for the same amount of fossil fuels burned. You can switch to lower carbon fuels, bring in renewables. Combined heat and power is where you, like at the French fry factory, they need a lot of steam to make French fries, but that steam generator can also produce electricity. So you get double the useful energy out of the same fuel source. You can, biomass is like, mixing low carbon fuels in. Renewables, you can build new nukes. Energy efficiency programs and policies. Transmission, so this is when sorry, I almost called you Lisa, I'm very sorry, that's our colleague. Julie said that this is about that issue of going either within the fence line of the generation source or going outside the fence line. As you go outside the fence line into that electric system, that's where you start to be able to capture things like energy efficiency or renewables or different types of generation sources as opposed to just the fossil fuel source. EPA has done this before. There's been some regulations in the sulfur dioxide context where there are some standards for the fuel going into the power plant. There's been some pollution credit trading in both nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide. So there is some precedent out there for doing outside the fence line, but it's not super common. So this rule, the Clean Power Plan, is probably the most ambitious effort to extend that idea of going beyond the fence line. The reason you want to do that, though, is that some of these things are really cheap. For example, energy efficiency. you can acquire for about maybe 2, 3, 4 cents per kilowatt hour per unit. That's cheaper than generation. So some of these outside the fence line things are a way to actually keep the cost of this compliance lower. State plans. Okay, this is a chart. This is the one that makes me lose sleep at night. Probably other people too. These are all the various ways that that a state could come up with a different plan. This looks like a mess, but it starts to simplify in some ways. That first decision is, do you choose the mass-based, that kind of cap of carbon, or do you choose rates? So carbon per unit of energy. That's a fundamental choice states are going to have to make. Once you make that initial choice, then you can kind of go down these other paths that really matter about kind of your electric system, your region, what's going on. A couple things I want to point out. This is the model rule that was brought up. The state, when their draft plan said, a lot of the comments back to the EPA said, hey, EPA, give us some indication of what you would actually accept in a state plan. And so they did in these model rules. And basically, if you adopt the model rule, you can kind of assume EPA would be like, okay, yeah, your state plan's good to go. I want to just point out a couple things on this. So the Clean Power Plan, EPA said we're going to regulate existing sources because that's the statute they're working under says we can only use existing sources. But they've given the option for states to choose to bring in new sources as well, to have one comprehensive rate scheme that regulates both new and existing. EPA could not mandate that, but they've said states are allowed to choose that. That's one thing. Then down here, you'll see actually these are all the same thing. And the rate-based plan actually requires kind of a lot more detail and I would call them complications in the actual state plan, because a rate is actually, it's a hard thing to prove. How do you actually prove what every unit of energy, what's the carbon footprint of every unit of energy? It takes a lot of paperwork. Where a mass is pretty easy, like you have a cap, you measure this thing's coming out. It's relatively more straightforward. This, sorry, a little bit out of order, but I just wanted to throw this out there as this is for each state, it shows the percentage reduction in carbon that each state has to achieve. You can see Idaho is, actually we get to increase our carbon under the plan. Well, compared to business as usual. The EPA wrote, we think business as usual, you'll be emitting this point of carbon. Under the power plan, you get a little bit more. Other states have big reductions. This was very different than in the draft rule when Idaho had one of the most stringent reductions proposed. The final rule, we have one of the least stringent reductions. Wyoming was kind of the opposite. The draft rule, they had one of the least stringent reductions, and now they have one of the most stringent.
Let's go back one sec to that note at the top. Without complements?
Oh, sorry. That's the term of art they're using to bring in the new sources. So to include the new fossil fuels sources with the existing sources. It's called the new source complement for some reason.
So, Ben, why the dramatic change between the draft and the final rule in terms of state compliance?
There was a big change in how they calculated the actual targets for each state. They changed the baseline they looked at, and that was big for Idaho because we had this gas plant that in the draft rule was assumed to exist for only 6 months, when in reality it was kind of there for a year, or will be there for a year. The final rule removed the whole building block that was about energy efficiency. That's not used to set the targets anymore when it was before. There's changes in just kind of the way they calculated the emissions for each, like gas and coal. The basic emission level for a gas plant and a coal plant. So there are a variety of changes that were made in response to comments. I mean, EPA listened. People wrote in a lot. This was like 4 million comments, I think, I heard EPA received. So there were some substantial changes in the overall way they calculated the emission reductions. Okay, this just points out kind of what Julie was saying, is that we import power. So this is a map I made, again, working on the technology. But the red fire things are coal plants. The orange volcanoes are geothermal plants, which is a really interesting idea here in Idaho. The wavy lines are hydro. The green are gas plants. What's not on here is right up here is a big coal plant called Coal Strip in Montana that is owned by Vista, which serves northern Idaho, and in Washington. So what's happening in Montana is also a big deal for Idaho. Also not on here are all the coal in Utah and Colorado that is owned and operated by PacifiCorp or Rocky Mountain Power that serves this little part of Idaho, but also serves 6 different states. PacifiCorp is a big deal in the West, and they have like 26 coal burning units that they're going to have to deal with in several states. So this is a big regional issue for sure. That's why it's really interesting. Idaho's target, like we could probably meet our own, but we really need to be paying attention about what's going on in our other states because we rely on them to supply the power that we all consume.
What's the worst case of that? I mean, our rates go up, we go dark. I mean, what actually, what's the bad version of the story? We're relying on the people who have to do something.
Well, Idaho has an opportunity. We have a lot of untapped energy generation resources in our state. We have an interesting geothermal resource that we could develop. We have more wind and solar that we could develop. We have biomass that we could develop. We might have to switch the generation sources. This could be structured in a way where Idaho becomes an energy exporter. We have clean stuff in our state. We develop that stuff, then our neighbors who are looking for cleaner energy start looking to us to export our clean energy to them. And how it impacts rates is very hard to predict.
If we don't do that, our rates go up, or we go down.
Well, we're not going to go dark. There's reliability valves in all the rules. There's plenty of generation out there in the country right now. And because that compliance timeline, you actually have till 2030, there's plenty of time to make sure that we can do this with the lights staying on. That's not really a problem. The rates thing is quite complicated. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of drivers of changing rates that we pay for electricity wholly outside of just carbon pollution. There's other pollutants. There's the need to upgrade an aging electric system. That's really what's driving up rates. Is just the need to upgrade the wires and the poles and the stuff that's out there that's been around for 40 years. So you can't say that. It would be hard actually to see exactly the carbon impact of rate increases versus a variety of issues that are driving up rates. Like for example, in the Hells Canyon relicensing, that's going to be a massive rate driver and could swallow some of the carbon stuff. This slide takes this idea of needing to pay attention to your outside your state just to show, it gets really crazy complicated. The dark circles, the black kind of is coal and stuff you see in the east. It's kind of silly to write a rule that just looks at a state when our electric system is not. It's an interstate system. It's power's flowing all over the place all the time. So it's really important to just be looking around the region and the country. So I'm going to go quickly into just some examples of how.
Are some of the other states open to Idaho's the idea of exporting into their states, like Wyoming or I mean, what is the state collaboration, I guess?
That's really hard. I met with John Chatburn. There you go. This graphic kind of shows like you have a bunch of sources and you can kind of allocate some of the emissions and credits around to find the more efficient processes. So I think this is actually my last slide. Yes. I thought this was interesting to kind of show what we need to do now and then what needs to happen going forward. So I spoke to that initial allocation of, if you're choosing the mass path, that initial allocation, that is a huge decision that the state needs to decide. Are we going to just give them away? Are we going to auction them? Who gets them? Really important. The new sources, are we going to choose to just deal with existing stuff? Or are we going to add that new source complement into the scheme so we have one regulatory scheme for all fossil emissions in the state? Then going forward, you have, that the graph I showed, or the image I showed before that showed the, the mass, and you have the tracking, and you make sure that's all happening. There's enforcement. Do you design a system that allows citizen enforcement, state enforcement, federal enforcement? There's some choices there. Then rate-based trading is you have to come up with what does a REC mean, or an ERC mean? What can actually generate those? How do you prove that they exist? How do you make sure that they're durable and verifiable and enforceable going forward? So there's a lot of decisions and processes that need to be, decisions made and processes created up front to get approval by EPA. And then going forward, you have to administer that credit trading desk. And EPA has been really clear that this, the ERCs, I use these terms, traceable, verifiable, durable, enforceable. There's some of these key words. You have to make sure that if you are putting, say it's an energy efficiency project that reduces the amount of carbon emissions, that generates a credit, how do you make sure that that efficiency project is going to be there for 20, 30 years? How do you make sure that it actually did reduce the amount, actually reduced energy consumption? There needs to be, verify this thing really works, and you have to verify that's really durable. Then you have to have a logical tracking system so that you can trace that one reduction to a specific end user and not have it be used multiple times by multiple people. And then there's a question of what if you mess up on the ERCs, the ERCs, who's liable? I haven't looked at this specifically. I've heard it might be like Idaho Power who's liable for the ERC failing, or it could be the state. I think this is an open question and it's unclear in the rule. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that. Yeah, this is a new thing I just picked up last week. This rule is big and complicated, and we are all still trying to figure out what it exactly says.
So it would be the administrator of the ERCs. My understanding in reading the model trading rules is that it's the administrator of the ERCs is liable for making sure that that's an ongoing, and now it's only post 2013 renewable, so ongoing generation source.
Yeah.
So who is the administrator? The states will have, this can't be a multi-state type of thing, right?
Not necessarily. The states would have to.
States?
Well, a state would have to administer their own program, but then there would have to be some sort of process for trading across states. So people have suggested that potentially using Regis, like we use for RECs, would work for ERCs as well.
So EPA is leaving up to the states to kind of decide whether that's going to be Regis or something else.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for those of you who don't work on RECs, because we just had a whole conversation in acronyms.
Regis is like the regional entity that keeps track of a similar thing that we're using. So.
I put this up there, but I realized it's kind of like that other slide I had. This just shows the change between the draft and the final rule, and who gets more and less stringent. So as you can see, some states got way less work to do out of the final rule, and some states have a lot more. So, but this key, I think, what highlights this again is, Wyoming. What's going on in Wyoming is a big deal. What's going on in Montana is a big deal. And how that would play out in our rates is, let's say Wyoming comes up with a plan that says, you know what, we're going to only look at, carbon capture and sequestration at our coal plants. That's our plan. That's Wyoming's plan to meet the target. That's fine, but then, so that would require some investments at the Jim Bridger plant. And then you go into the rate making setting and the utilities come in and be like, look, we made this investment on behalf of our customers. It's used and useful for providing electric service. That was the plan. Now we customers have to go pay for that because that was Wyoming's plan. And they maybe chose a plan that was more expensive than some other options. That's not because anybody did anything wrong. It's just that we need to be looking at what Wyoming's doing. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to pay some money for their plans. So just my final pitch that you got to look beyond our borders on this thing and figure out how to collaborate and cooperate across those state lines.
So Ben, where are those collaborative opportunities going to be presented to us? And is it something that like the legal community can get involved with, whether they have a client or not? I know, you know, the nonprofit community is trying to figure out how to insert themselves into the process, but is it going to be an administrative rulemaking this season, the legislative session this session, or?
Well, we have, let me go back to that first slide. So in this kind of, I think, 2016 to 2018, that's where we kind of have to figure out how to make these conversations happen. I know that the state is meeting with their colleagues, like right now, some folks from the Office of Energy Resources are down in San Diego meeting with colleagues from around the West. I'm leaving today to go meet with my environmental colleagues from around the West, trying to figure this out. Hopefully soon we'll get to some more formal opportunities to bring the different states together in the region to start working through these ideas. But I think it's something we're going to have to create and push for. We all pay for power. You all have clients that pay for power. So anything you can do to remind our states and utilities and stakeholders, like, hey, let's get together, let's figure this out, let's not develop our plans in a vacuum, is going to be really helpful. But there's nothing, we're going to have to create those opportunities and make sure that they happen.
Actually, one small point on that. Sorry to interrupt. I know that it's like I don't want to take over your question and answer session, but the final rule requires states to have a stakeholder outreach portion while they're developing the state plan. So that will be publicized probably to the environmental community. I'm not sure how they're planning on doing it, but they're required to do it. So there will be opportunities of some kind.
Yeah, that's true. In state for sure. And what I was referring to is how can we, and I think what your question is, how can we make sure that our neighboring states are all getting together and having those conversations as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge mess, or it could turn into just a huge mess. The regulation is incredibly complex, and like trying to get
super complicated.
The people, you know, when you say the people with quotes around it, like what does that even mean? Everyone's gonna have different input, and so how to make that a clean process. Like say, we have to create it. So I'm not expecting you to tell me what's the list of all the meetings that we need to go to or anything like that yet. But
yeah, we're still working that. I think there's a lot of people are just still trying to figure out what's in there. What does this rule mean? What are our options? What are the pros and cons of those options? There's still a lot of work to be done before you can have an intelligent, I mean, you witnessed this today. It's hard to explain this stuff as we are learning on the fly.
So, you know, I presume that there's some opportunities for distributed power production, you know, from the consumer side in terms of rooftop solar or whatever. You know, if you're sitting back and making a decision at this point, I mean, I installed solar a month ago. I mean, is there a potential that could get some sort of credit? Idaho Power captures that credit. Is that all being discussed at this point? But what's a consumer to do at this point, I guess?
My understanding of how this works is if it's something, either rooftop solar, new utility scale renewables, end use energy efficiency, if that action was taken after the publication of the draft rule, so post, when it was published, 2014.
Well,
June 2014.
2013, actually, they're counting anything January 1st, 2013.
All right, okay, so past the baseline. The baseline is 2012. So any action taken past the baseline, so that would be in 2013, as long as it's delivering carbon reductions in this compliance period, then it's eligible, potentially, to be a way to comply. So you can install something here, but the carbon reductions have to actually be occurring here in order for it to count. So, you know, rooftop solar, I mean, stuff's warranted for like 25 years. If you put it in today, it's going to be working. Efficiency is a little harder. Some things like insulating your home, that lasts as long as your home exists. A new washer, it could wear out in 10 years. So it kind of depends on the measure. But
I guess at this point, I mean, you know, I would think it was Idaho Power, presumably, or, you know, the state is going to come up with incentives and say, hey, we can reduce, you know, whatever percentage by doing these measures. And that may be a tax credit for insulating your home. That may be a tax credit for rooftop solar. And so I guess what I'm hearing is there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of, you know, what the average consumer can do at this point. And it may be financially beneficial to wait and see what the rules are coming out before undertaking, you know, what may be a $50,000 improvement to your house. A lot's up in the air right now.
There is. There's also a lot more reasons than just this rule to clean up our electric system. So I wouldn't, don't make all your decisions based on what might come out of this thing, is what I would say. There are good reasons to reduce, anytime you reduce your consumption, that means you're just paying less for power. So it's a good reason to do it today.
Well, it also seems like it would behoove the utility companies to claim credit for people putting rooftop solar on, being like, we are financing rooftop solar, or we are installing industrial solar in order to burn less coal. And then maybe the EPA would give the state credit for that. Because
Right.
utilities have their hands in it or something.
Well, it depends. So if you go with a rate-based system, then any new renewable, so rooftop solar would be included, would generate an ERC that could then be sold. But the state gets to allocate what happens to those ERCs. So potentially, if the state allocates that generators get them, then if you put rooftop solar on your roof, you would get an ERC and you would be able to sell it.
Guessing I don't have the political.
Why would the state do that though? Do you think?
I don't know. There's been a lot of discussion about a number of things, and one is to promote renewable generation. So giving it to generators promotes renewables. But then there's another spin, which is, you could, if the state keeps all of those ERCs that are generated within its state and auctions them off, then it allows for a new revenue stream within the state that they can use to promote renewables or do whatever. So, I mean, you've got so many options at this point, especially where the model trading rules are still not finalized, that it's, I mean, we have no idea what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, the other, so that's true with on a rate-based system, you could have a new generation source that generates this credit that then you can move around. In a mass-based system, fossil-free generation is power to supply all of our needs without carbon emission. So it's a way to stay within your mass cap while allowing for more and more power production and consumption within the state. Just capping fossil fuels doesn't mean that's only the amount of electricity we'll ever have. You can always have more renewables, non-fossil fuel sources. You can also, we can be way more efficient in how we use power. And so you get more productivity out of the energy that we're currently consuming. So there are ways to kind of grow, the economy's still gonna grow, we're still gonna be able to have plenty of power under either system, but the dynamics and how it plays out will be very different.
All right, well, thanks so much, guys. So I'll give them just a couple of housekeeping items. If you haven't signed up for getting CLE credit, make sure you do that on the way out. And for those on the phone, I'll make sure that you are on the list. And other than that, we're adjourned. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks again. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Oh yeah, we had it.
Yeah, he was like.
Are you headed down?